today I am extremely honoured to be able to present you a vintage interview which I sat down in conversation with the legendary horror author Guy N. Smith. Now, it's a really interesting story how this interview came to be. I interviewed Guy. I drove up to his home in the Black Hills. It's got to be about 15 years ago now. And I sat down and spent an enjoyable afternoon with Guy. We sat there in his kitchen. We smoked pipes because we were both pipe smokers at that time. And we talked about our favourite subjects, adventure fiction, horror fiction, and the old paperbacks from the 1970s and 1980s, you know, that used to fill the spinner racks in shops everywhere. That interview I did, it was commissioned for an online magazine called, believe it or not, Scary Motherfucker. And anyway, the interview was published, and then eventually that magazine disappeared. Its website went, and I lost the interview. I didn't actually have a physical copy of it. Now, many years later, Guy N. Smith has sadly passed away, and I was contacted recently by his daughter, Tara. And when I did the interview back in the day, she'd been sent a copy by a fan of her father's books. And she thanked me for the interview, and she said that when she'd lost her dad, being able to listen to the interview and hearing him there, it gave her a lot of comfort. So I was really pleased to hear that. And then she asked me if she could use the interview on a website, because they're relaunching a lot of her father's books, a lot of Guy N. Smith's book, and I'll put a link down to that in the description below. So they asked me if I could use it. I said, of course you can, I'd be honoured. I said, but I'd love a copy of the interview myself, because I haven't got a physical file. I've lost the original file, and the website that originally published it no longer exists. And so she sent me the audio, and that's what's make up the bulk of this video here today. So without further ado, let me introduce you to an interview with the legendary horror author Guy N. Smith.
Guy N. Smith was born in 1939 in Staffordshire and is a prolific English writer best known for his pulp fiction style horror. He's also written, though, non-fiction, some soft porn and children's literature. Smith wrote his first horror book, Werewolf by Moonlight, in 1974, and that spawned 2 direct sequels. However, he is probably best known for his series of 6 crab books, the first of which, Night of the Crabs, was published in 1976. The series chronicles invasions by giant man-eating crabs and are usually set around various areas of the British coastline. The pulpish nature of Smith's concept and writing is a legendary in the horror field, and he has been spoofed by the award-winning comedian and writer Matthew Holness in his Garth Marenghi persona. Smith has had over 1,000 short stories and magazine articles published. He's written a series of children books under the pseudonym Jonathan Guy, 2 thrillers under the name Gavin Newman, and a dozen non-fiction books on countryside matters. However, it is for his 70 or so horror novels that he is best known. The Penguin Encyclopedia of Horror and Supernatural considers that Smith's novels were endearing and imbued with lively storytelling and the tacky brilliance of the horror and science fiction cinema of the 1950s. Smith made enough of an impact to be mentioned by Stephen King in his study of the horror genre, Danse Macabre. An hallmark of Smith's work is the sex, violence, gore and humour. However, despite his reputation in some quarters as a hack writer, Smith's novels are very skillfully written and totally enjoyable, and rare is the reader who puts the book down after the first page. In fact, the opposite is true, and 1 page is enough usually to get you hooked by the story. Smith writes with a skill and a pace that is nothing short of brilliance. So sit back and enjoy our interview with horror legend Guy N. Smith. Okay, I'm on the final leg of my journey now, and I'm climbing up into the Black Hills to meet up with legendary horror author Guy N. Smith. Now, the Black Hills sounds like a really appropriate place for an horror writer to live, and conjures up images of monolithic, shadowy hills, you know, like the hills of Mordor, when the truth couldn't be further from that. And I've passed through some wonderful countryside on my way towards the rather isolated looking location in which I now find myself. You can hear Homer Simpson there on my sat-nav telling me to turn left. I'm on a narrow country lane. I'm just over a mile away from Guy's house, the Wayne house. I'm having to turn now, which I don't think I should, so... Where do you want to write in the first place? I believe your mother was a writer.
Yeah, my mother was a pre-war historical author. She had 3 books published, and she always encouraged me. When I was a young boy, I used to write a weekly comic for her. And illustrate it, for which she used to pay me 6pence, and I kept every copy. Well, she did, and then she gave them back to me years later. And he used to do her a monthly cowboy one as well. But he taught me to write, and I had the encouragement, and she used to, she encouraged me at every move, whereas my father discouraged me.
Right.
Because I was destined for banking before I was born, because of a banking family. My father was a bank manager, so was my uncle. My cousin was a chief cashier, and I was going in the bank full stop, so I didn't really have much choice. And I think my father was afraid that I might diversify and perhaps go into journalism or whatever. So I continued writing, and my mother used to do the ladies' page, the women's page, and the children's page for a Wolverhampton paper called the Technical Observer.
Right.
And she asked me to write a few stories, and that in the end, that was from the time I was 12 till I was about 17. I did 56 stories in all, many of which were serials.
And they were being published in this newspaper?
Yeah, every week. We did put them all into one volume about 10 years ago, called 50 Tales from the 50s.
Right.
Highwaymen, westerns, pirates, science fiction, detective, you name it, I wrote it. But that was all teaching me to develop plots and characters.
Right. So when you were the westerns, the kind of adventure stories, what writers were you reading as a young boy?
Well, he used to have 14 weekly comics, which I paid for out of my own money because I used to have a gardening round locally at the time. So my father thought it was all rubbish, but I was paying for it out of my gardening money, as I was paying for the cinema, and he just let it go at that. But all those comics, and I mean, let's face it, the Thompson comics and the Associated Press, like Champion, Hotspur, Rover, etc., they'd all got really good stories in, right? And I mean, the spin-off from that was that in years to come, I was writing Dixon Hawk detective stories for D.C. Thompson.
Right. It's interesting. So your first professional sale wasn't a novel, and it was a short story, was it?
Oh, they were all short stories.
Right.
And then by the time we got to the 1960s, I was writing for the shooting magazines, Shooting Times and the Gamekeeper and Countryside, and I was getting everything accepted, so I mean, it was fine. At the back of my mind was the idea that this is really my way out of banking if I can stick at it and make a success of it.
Right.
And alongside that, of course, I started the book-selling business. Primarily, we started with comics and boys' papers because I was replacing everything that my mother had sent to the church bazaar, and it was doing well, but it wasn't enough to make a living out of. And I really only started to make progress after I got married, when I was away from home, and I hadn't got this influence from my father, so, oh, this is no good, or get on with your banker's exams. And so I then started writing fiction, which was Dixon Hawk detective stories for D.C. Thompson, and then I found my way into the London Mystery Magazine in 1972. In all, I did 18 stories for them until they ceased publication. But a lot of these initial ideas evolved into novels in later years.
So how did you come to development? Because as I say, you're chiefly known as a horror writer, developed towards the horror genre. What was that?
Well, I would have been a Western writer if I'd had my way, but horror, there was a niche with New English Library. It came to me via a friend who was an ex-editor there. They wanted a werewolf novel. So one horribly wet Sunday afternoon, I knocked out a 5-page synopsis. I mean, it must have been telling me something, because we were living in Tamworth at the moment, and there was a terrific explosion behind the gas fire, like a shotgun going off, which we all ran outside. It was because it turned out the chimney hadn't been lined, and a pocket of gas had got in a cavity somewhere and exploded. But I mean, that was in the middle of doing my werewolf synopsis, so I thought, yeah, that's telling me
It's a normal, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I suppose with most auto readers, the books that you're most well known for are the Crabs series. When was Crabs? 76, was it? Was it 76?
Yes.
So we'd had
Werewolf by Moonlight.
Yeah.
The Sucking Pit.
Right.
The Slime Beast.
Yeah.
Right. And then, of course, came a double commission for Night of the Crabs and Return of the Werewolf. They said do the Crabs first. No, sorry, they said do the Werewolf one first, right, which I did. And then I did the Crabs one. I didn't realise until virtually publication time what it was going to amount to, because it was billed as a great beach read. And I know that when we went over to the Welsh coast on holiday with the kids, the bookshops were full of them, racks of them. And it was reprinted before publication, and I suppose it was reprinted altogether about 10 times.
So when you were thinking of the idea of the Crabs, were you consciously trying to think of some sort of creature type thing, because James Herbert had had success a few years earlier with the Rats?
No,
And they were a lot.
The Rats wasn't published when I wrote the Crabs.
Oh, I wasn't. I thought the Rats was 74. It was later, was it?
I wrote, let me see, I'm not sure, but I didn't know anything about the Rats.
Right.
No, I wrote the Crabs. It was, we were talking with a mate of mine one evening. He popped down for a drink, and he got onto the subject of crabs, and he was saying, just suppose you've got really huge crabs, you know, because they can be terrible creatures. And so I developed this plot, right? I wrote The Night of the Crabs in a week, and I thought, that's it, you know, it'll sell a few, but nothing special. But, I mean, it's just gone on and on and on.
And does that continued success surprise you? Because they're still popular now and they've got a cult following.
I know, 75% of the fan mail that comes in here is Crabs related.
Does that surprise you at all? Or?
It doesn't now, it did originally, but, I mean, there's some guys that they've, with my blessing, they've written a Crabs book for charity. Right. Fine, you know. I mean, there's no copyright on actual crabs, but it was something. I'm amazed that crabs developed into what they have. I mean, they become so big and they've got a cult following.
Yeah, and they continue to have that following.
Yeah.
So going back to the period when the order novels to New English Library, what's the most books you produced in any one year?
I've written 10 books in a year.
Were they all order books then, or are they?
No.
Right.
When I say books, I was doing Walt Disney novelisations for NEL, and I did some confession books.
I was just going to ask you, Confessions of a Window Cleaner, Bank Clerk, Games Mistress. How did you end up with our gig?
I was introduced to a guy who knew some publishers, Tabor Publications in London, and he was looking for novels. Obviously, I mean, we got the Confessions of a Window Cleaner and everything, and he wanted more explicit novels. So I said, all right, I'll give it a go. And it just went one after the other. I mean, they were easy to write. There's a lot of jokes in them.
Yeah. So the actual Confessions of a Window Cleaner was the first one that you...
Confessions of a Bank Clerk.
All right, but the Confessions of a Window Cleaner, was that based on the film script?
No, it's nothing like
that. So they were unrelated.
I haven't seen the film or even read the book.
Right.
It was just, I mean, at the back of my mind when I wrote it was George Formby's song When I'm Cleaning Windows.
Right.
And I thought, oh, there's plenty of scope here. But the first one was the Confessions of a Bank Clerk, because I worked in a bank, right? This is when I was working at the Birmingham Treasury, where we got a staff of about 50, and I wrote it, and they were when it was published, they were rushing out to buy copies to see if there was anything about any of them in it.
And was there?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so.
You couldn't say if there was. So over the years, how many different pen names have you used? Because you've worked in a number of genres. You've written war novels, westerns, children's.
I mean, pen names, I think I used 7 for the Confessions books.
Right.
I used Jonathan Guy for my children's books. I used Gavin Newman for mysteries such as The Hangman and An Unholy Way to Die. With the Countryman's Weekly, I've got 4 pseudonyms there,
right.
But they're house names that go back many years to my predecessors.
Right. But regarding novel writing, would you say that any, and the genres you worked in, are any more difficult than others to actually, I mean, is it more difficult to write an horror novel, say, than a children's novel?
No, I write whatever a publisher wants. No, I don't find any one novel more difficult than another. But with the horror, you see, they wanted so much off me because the print runs were 100,000 and they were reprinting and then they were wanting more. But it turned out that I could write more books than they could publish.
Right.
So we made a deal with New English Library and Hamlin Paperbacks that everybody was agreeable to this, that I wrote for both, but they liaised to make sure that 2 books didn't come out at the same time.
But they used the Guy and Smith names if they were all the other stuff. Yeah, because I remember seeing some of your books by because most of your horror novels were New English Library. But I remember seeing one. Would a Spear have ever done any of them?
Spear,
yeah,
I did 4 or 5 for Spear.
Right.
Piatkus.
Right.
And Seven House. Nowadays, I mean, I'm letting some of the small press publishers reprint various titles to get them back in print as actual books as opposed to e-books.
Right. And do you see the e-books as perhaps in some way restarting the popularity that the old paperback originals used to have back in the 70s and 80s?
Oh yes, undoubtedly. I mean, the sales go up every month. Every month there.
And it's still an infant market as well, isn't it? So it's growing all the time.
Oh yeah. I mean, we're looking at putting 2 books a month up until we've exhausted all my books. But then, of course, there's going to be original novels which are going to be slotted in as well.
Right. I was reading an article, I think online on your Wikipedia entry, regarding the way during the mid-80s horror changed and suddenly you were asked to write more complex books,
Yes.
I think the quote, paraphrasing a bit, but you said you found that type of thing depressing.
Psychological horror, depressing.
Right.
Not that I get depressed, but you see, my early books, they're all good fun books. There's a lot of gore in them, but it's an impossible situations like slime beasts, crabs and everything else. But I find this type of psychological horror very dark. There's a market for it, certainly, but I mean, I personally feel it's still good fun.
Yeah, and I agree with you fully. My own personal reading, especially in the horror genre, are probably what would have been termed as pulp type writing. Are there any other authors that particularly influenced you in your own work?
Lionel Fanthorpe was one, because before I started writing horror in the 50s, I mean, he was turning out a lot of books. I mean, they had some magnificent covers for Badger books, and I think they were 1 and 6 or 2 shillings, and I used to buy them. And then now I've collected them so that I've got a whole set, a complete set. Yeah, he was one. Now other writers, I occasionally get asked for a Lovecraftian type story.
Right.
I did one for Robinson's, which is fine, but again it's something I find, although it's not psychological horror, it's really dark stuff. Because Lovecraft was a manic depressive and it comes over there, and I don't want to write as a manic depressive.
Do you think that perhaps the way that the horror genre has gone in and out of popularity is something to do with the direction, maybe that both films and book went in the mid-80s where everything did get blacker and darker. I mean, we're at the stage now, for example, I watched one of the Saw movies recently just to see what and it's basically just torture porn. It's not...
Yeah. I think one of the things was, with horror, they saturated the market. You see, there were a few of us that were selling a lot of books, and publishers thought, the more books we get out, the more we're going to sell. And I remember going to the Hamlin Paperbacks Halloween party.
Right.
There were a load of youngsters there, and they'd have got books commissioned. And I thought at the time, this isn't going to work. There's just going to be too much around. And I was right, because within a few years they were saying, horror doesn't sell. Well, I think a lot of that is to do with they weren't marketing it. Everything's cyclic, and I think now it will come back, but it will be the best of horror that will be top of the league again.
Yeah.
I don't think, I think it's going to be quality rather than quantity.
Mm-hmm. You wrote a few novels based on a series character, but that was towards the end of the horror boom, the Sabbath books. They went to 4 titles, didn't they? Could you ever see yourself bringing that character back if things...
The fans are saying, look, the fan mail, when can we have another Sabbath book? Sabbats did well, and they're still very popular, and there's 4 of them plus short stories. But if that series had been published 4 or 5 years earlier, it would have been on a par with the Western Edge series. It would have been up to about number 40 or 50. But by that time, series were losing their popularity.
Yeah, because they came out on the tail end of all that, didn't they? It's right in the later years. Your books, so I believe, have had a massive success, especially the Crabs in Poland. Why do you think they're so successful in Poland?
They were successful in Poland because communism was dead, right? But prior to that, all horror books was underground material, right? And suddenly, it could be in the bookshops, right? So the Polish thought, right, here we go. So anyway, they came to me because I'd got the most titles to offer, and they were publishing 2 titles a month with print runs of 100,000 and reprinting, which was fine, right? Except that we're going back to what happened with horror here in the 80s, saturated the market, but of course they really didn't know how to handle money, and I saw the publishers over here beginning part of the year, and he said to me, royalties, he mentioned huge figures for royalties, right? But when it came to royalty time, right, it was under $8,000.
Right.
And this was before emailing and everything, and I faxed him and I quoted certain things in the contract, and his only comment was, I did not expect you to cite the contract. And then they just disappeared. And I found out since they sold several titles on to Russia. I've got a couple upstairs in Russian. I mean, I never had the money for that.
Think at all.
But now, of course, I'm popular again in Poland.
Right.
They're looking at 2 novels at the moment, and they've just bought a couple of short stories off me.
The Crabs was, I didn't know this myself, so I started doing some research, but it'd been filmed once under the name of Island Claws. I've never seen our movie. What was it like?
Awful.
Right.
But I'm not one of these authors who say, oh, look what they've done to my plot. No. They bought the film rights, what they do is up to them. I mean, it was really a mishmash of bits from all the Crabs films, and what I found the most laughable of all was Killer Crabs was set on Hayman Island on the Barrier Reef, with the plush hotel and the wealthy people. Now, it turned out in the film to be a shack on a beach.
Right.
And you never saw the Crabs Only the one at the end. You heard the clicking, and they were always in the shadows.
I'm surprised that I don't know if I have seen it perhaps, and perhaps I put it out of my mind, but
video.
Alright. I'm going to desperately try and seek a copy out. So as you say now, you've got a program where you're going to be re-releasing a lot of your past work as ebooks and also original novels.
Yeah.
So are these, will there be another Crabs novel, for instance? A new
I've
Crabs
got a
novel?
synopsis.
Right.
What I'm going to concentrate on now, it seems that the most popular format and length for books is novellas.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I've got the Crabs novella synopsis done. I might write it this winter.
Right.
But there's so much Crabs material being reissued. Yes, there's room for it, but...
Because there was a graphic novel of the Crabs as well, wasn't there?
Yes.
Right.
That's been reprinted. That's a really, really nice production, that is.
So they still are very popular. I mean, I know a lot of, as I say, friends, and when I mentioned I was popping up to interview, they all quoted the Crabs, you know?
Yeah.
And it's kind of...
Because the Crabs novella, the Crabs graphic novel is illustrated by Charlie Adlard.
Right.
You know, he's a Marvel Comics artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the best. I know the family, they live locally.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the script and he did the artwork.
So concentrating on just the other novels you wrote, were any more satisfying than others to yourself? Do any stand out as favourites then?
Well, I liked them all when I wrote them. I mean, when you're writing a book, you've got to say to yourself, this is the best that I've ever written.
Yeah.
Unless you do that, you won't write a very good book. I suppose the Crabs really, because in a bizarre sort of way I came to love them, because they were creating sales, everybody talks about them, and we get a lot of jokes, right? How's the Crabs guy? Oh, itching, you know, yeah, they were good fun. Yeah, I really would like to do another, but I've looked at the synopsis, whether to make it any different or whether to go along the same lines, because what I did was immensely successful and I would not like to detract from that by doing something that's vastly different.
Right. When a reader's reading, say an horror novel, for instance, the reader allows themselves to fall into this fantastic world and is sometimes so far-fetched you suspend your disbelief. Would there ever, as a writer, when you're writing about, say, these fantastic situations or creatures, is there ever a problem with actually believing in what you're writing while you write?
I don't think you really believe in it, but you say to yourself, you know, this is a good tale. Where do we go from here? And I always have a very detailed synopsis before I start any book. It's divided up into chapters, characters and everything, so that once I start writing, I know exactly where I'm going, and okay, I'll probably alter a bit as we go along, but I've got it planned for length. I know exactly how long it's going to be, and chapter by chapter. But as far as believing in it, I mean, it would be difficult certainly for me to believe in what I'm writing is true, but I know that I'm giving the fans a lot of enjoyment. I do my best to produce something, even if it's bizarre.
But are you ever conscious of, as you say, and perhaps believing in is the wrong phrase, but when a reader's in that story, is totally engrossed in that story, the story in a sense is real to them. Yeah. Are you ever conscious of, when you're working out your synopsis, whatever, of overstepping that and then rather than creating tension or suspense of making a reader laugh and perhaps losing the effect that the novel's...
No, I intend to make him laugh with one or two jokes.
Yeah.
And there are a few jokes in there which only I know they're jokes. No, I'm trying to give him as much enjoyment as ever possible. As far as believing in them, there's an old story which goes back right to the 70s, but New English Library had a complaint from the owners of Shell Island that the Crabs books were ruining the trade because people were frightened of the Crabs. And all I said was, well, no, I think actually the people are going there because the Crabs are there. I mean, it was nonsense, really. But I had some fan mail in a few weeks back from a fan who he'd lost his original Crabs novel and he picked up another one, and he said, the strange thing is, he said, next week we're off on holiday to Crabs Island. I'm saving this to read when we get there.
So are you ever consciously aware of the people you're trying to write for? Have you got a picture in your mind of your ideal reader when you start a book?
There isn't an ideal reader. I mean, with having had the fan club conventions annually for many years, I mean, they're all different.
Right.
They're all different age groups. I mean, we get some here. The most recent fan club convention, which was this September, there's a guy there in his 70s, right? And you've got them, a lot in there, about their 40s, who remember the actual books. And then you've got some new readers. I mean, there isn't a typecast fan at all. The letters that I get in, the fan mail, they're all from different walks of life. I mean, you get some who are professional men who love them. You get others who are perhaps just working in a supermarket, and yeah, they all love them.
So it's across all walks of life then. It must have been a kick for you though, during the mid to late 70s when most bookshops carried your titles. That must have been a good feeling. I can't imagine. I mean, I write westerns myself, as you know, but it's primarily for the library market. So I've never had the thing of going into a bookshop and seeing my own books there. Because you were well represented in the horror section. When I was a kid, there was a lot of Guy and Smith books there.
Yeah, at one stage, W.H. Smith's had a shelf with my name on, as did Stephen King and some of the others. But I mean, I think that the most exciting time was in '76. That was the year when The Crabs was published. We went to Barmouth with the kids for a week's holiday, which is where The Crabs, obviously, the book was set. And these craft shops and everything have got racks of them. But we walked into W.H. Smith's. This was sort of a lovely summer evening when you sort of dawdle around the town and the shops are open. We walked into W.H. Smith's and the kids were shouting, "Dad, they've got your books here." And their heads were turning, right? And the manager came and he said, "Are these yours, sir?" And I said, yeah. And he said, "Do you think you could do a bit of a signing session?" So I ended up on a holiday evening sitting there signing copies of Night of the Crabs. And I also had another writer who writes in a different genre. He rang me up once and he said, "I don't believe this." He said, "The shop down the road," he says, "has got a shelf full of this Night of the Crabs." And he said, I said to the owner, "Do you ever sell any of these?" And he said, I've restocked that shelf 3 times this week. I mean, yeah, they just sold. It's a magnificent experience. I mean, many times I've been through similar with books, but not to the extent that Night of the Crabs was literally everywhere.
And during that period, there were a lot of horror writers and a lot of horror paperbacks in direct competition with each other. Were you ever aware of trying to sort of beat so-and-so or so-and-so in the market? Or were you keeping an eye on what other writers were doing?
Never. I didn't read their book.
Right.
For 2 reasons.
Right.
One, I didn't want to get accused of ripping off, right? And I've always had a policy, you concentrate on your own strengths, never mind the opposition.
Right.
And no, I mean, people will try and make out that I emulated them, but no. There was a market there for this type of horror, right? I was fortunate enough to drop into it, and I did my own thing, book after book.
How many horror books did you write?
I suppose we're looking at 60 to 70.
And you didn't tire of the genre at all. It was just that the market changed, and because
No, I didn't tire of it. No, I mean, everything. The market was changing, and I mean, when you are a professional writer writing for a living, you take every opportunity that comes your way. I mean, like somebody, publisher said to me, he wanted a book on fish keeping, right? And I said, "Okay, I'll do you one." And I did, and he was very pleased with it, and he got reasonable sales. I mean, I could have said, oh no, I only write horror, but no, you don't know what the future holds. So anything that comes your way, you take it. Nowadays, that is not easy because I get so many people contacting me and they want stories for anthologies, basically it is, right? But they're not offering any payment in a lot of cases, or offering a share of profits or whatever. And I mean, I have a full-time journalism job anyway, and I can't afford to spend time writing a quality story, because I wouldn't write anything less, for somebody who's just going to publish it in a small run somewhere or other, and that's it.
But a lot of beginner writers got to go down that route, because
Yeah.
sometimes name recognition is more important. So what advice would you give someone starting out today, someone who says, for instance, picks up Night of the Crabs or one of your, and is influenced enough by that to put pen to paper? What advice would you tell them to go into the banking profession?
No, I would say don't get disillusioned, right? It's harder now than ever before, but just stick at it all the time. Just keep at it. The more you write, the better you get.
So probably one of the most important factors for anyone to have would be a tremendous amount of self-belief then,
Yeah,
because
you've got to have belief.
because all writers, you get knocked back.
Yeah.
Rejection after rejection.
I mean, I wrote a book, again, this was something that came my way, writing horror fiction for A&C Black, right? And people getting regular emails asking advice. I refer them to that book because I put into that book everything that I have done, everything I know. I don't know anymore. It is all...
And I actually own a copy of that book. I bought it recently as an ebook, so
Yeah.
I've been reading it on my Kindle. And yeah, there's some, although some of it's dated because things have changed so much, but there's some information here. But whenever you as a writer trying to reading advice from other writers, how-to books, we devour them because we're searching for a secret of success. Yeah, and that's so.
There isn't a secret. No. I mean, one, you've got to be able to write, right? Secondly, you've got to be lucky. You've got to be in the right place at the right time. I mean, that is really what happened with me, with Werewolf by Moonlight. Somebody wanted a werewolf novel. I could write one. In I went, and that led to many more.
So when you started that book, Werewolf by Moonlight, what knowledge did you have of that subject matter? Was it from the old movies or books that you'd read? Or?
I did a quick bit of research on werewolves in case there was anything I didn't know, but I mean, there's not a lot to know about them. I mean, there's this, as you know, a disease called lycanthropy, right, which is probably what they all were, right? I knew how a werewolf behaved, full moon, going on the rampage, and where better to set it than here on the Black Hill?
Yeah.
But then, of course, I did the book called Wolf Curse. Now, there is a psychopath, really. He might have had lycanthropy. At the end of the book, you're not really sure, right? When he's gone. Then I get people writing into me, you don't make it clear in the book whether he's a werewolf or not. No, of course I didn't. That's for you to make your mind upon. That was the whole point of the book.
Was there ever a line that you wouldn't cross in the amount of violence? Were you when you were writing a scene, I know it was fantastic violence, but was there a certain direction you'd go in, or a certain you'd cut off and say, I'm not going any further now? Were you ever? Yeah.
I don't like things happening to kids. Right. Keep kids out of it if possible. Right. I mean, with the crabs, well, it doesn't matter a lot because they'll devour anybody, and it's all carnage, unbelievable carnage anyway. But I don't like it when you've got kids being murdered. I mean, we get far too much of it in real life on the television, you know, bodies found here, bodies found there, little girls go missing.
Yeah.
I just don't want to get involved in it because that is too much like real life.
So have you ever written a particularly violent scene in any of your books and self-censored yourself, toned it down maybe? Have you ever got to that point?
No, I can't say so. my Bamboo Gorillas, right, there was a sequel to that, and I don't know what happened to the copy manuscript. See, Muse Books was an imprint of New English Library, right? Peter Haining, late Peter Haining, was a great bloke, he was the editor. Now, I worked with Peter, we did The Truckers and then Bamboo Gorillas, and he said to me, go right over the top, because you're in Japanese prisoner of war camps. He said, whatever you want. And I mean, yeah, it was pretty graphic. So they published the first one, I mean, which is a classic today, and I mean, I've seen the prices it fetches on eBay. Number 2, right? By then, Muse Books wasn't a success because, as I've already said, series were coming to an end, right? So NEL took over all the manuscripts. So one day I got a phone call from a young girl who was an editorial assistant or something, and she said she'd just been subbing Bamboo Gorillas 2. She found it very graphic. Could I tone a lot of it down? And I said no, because I said I wrote that under editorial guidance from Peter Haining, and that was what he wanted me to write. And I said that was what I was paid to write. And I said I'm not prepared to reduce any of it, right? And the book was never published.
That period and that type of way of working really interests me, because I was speaking to Terry Arnott a while back, and there were a group of Western writers at the time, as you know, and most of them working for New English Library, called the Piccadilly Cowboys. Yeah. And he said they would all meet up from time to time in a pub, and there was a bit of a friendly rivalry then. They each spurred each other on. When you were writing during the 70s after New English Library, was there ever any of that? Were there any writers that you particularly became friendly with?
Yeah, I was very friendly with the late Lawrence James.
Right.
He was a lovely bloke, really was. Sadly died, I suppose 10 years ago now. We used to have long chats on the phone. And Lawrence and Angus Wells, who's also dead now.
Because he did a couple of westerns, didn't he? I know the name Angus Wells.
Yes, he died in a fire. Yeah, they reckon that he was probably smoking in bed and dozed off. But I don't know really. But Angus Wells and I knew them or knew of them, and of course Frederick Nolan, right? Who'd written an awful lot of books. Very highly respected.
He's an expert on Billy the Kid, isn't he? Fred Nolan. Yeah, I've spoke to Fred a couple of times.
Yeah, we have a chat a couple of times a year, because he was a friend of Lawrence's as well. I've greatest respect and admiration for Fred. He's still writing.
Because he did a couple of the Sudden books as Oliver Strange, didn't he? 5 he did, I know he did a few of them.
Yeah.
And those days when that type of mass market fiction was being published regularly, I think that's the type of thing that'll interest the people who are going to listen to this show. So any interesting little stories from that period would be great if we could think of anything more.
There's a magazine called Paperback Fanatic.
Yeah, which I've subscribed to that.
Right, yeah. Justin has done a lot on me in the past in it, and we keep in touch regularly. But those are the old New English Library days, where they were, the editors then, they were giants in the business. They were highly respected. Nowadays, they are generally fresh from university. They're only in the job for a year or so, and then they're moving on. But when I was writing for New English Library, we had Nick Webb there, who then went on to Sphere, right? But Nick was a giant of a man in every way. Huge, bearded man, super bloke. Really, I liked him and respected him, and I knew where I stood with him.
Right.
But today, these young editors, they got no knowledge of what I've done in the past, the successes that I had. It's all changed. And that's another reason why I'm glad to be doing e-books, because you're master of your own destiny.
Which gives you more freedom and pretty much your own boss. So how much freedom, creative freedom, did you actually have during the heyday of the paperback? Did editors interfere in what you were writing? Did they tell you this amount of... So you had total...
I rang up once in my early days, about my 5th book, and spoke to an editor there, and just sent the manuscript in, and it had the advance, and I said, what do you think of it? And he said, so long as it's got a good cover, and got your name on, the contents are immaterial. I felt a little offended, actually.
So you'd almost, in a sense, become a product then?
I was.
In that...
I mean, even today, I'm a brand name.
Yeah.
I remember once at New English Library, Nick Webb taking me down to meet the advertisement, the publicity department. Mm-hmm. And he introduced me, and the guy there shook my hand, and he said, "Good God," he said, "a Guy N. Smith actually exists." He said, "I thought it was a team of writers."
Because there was a lot of that going on, wasn't there, with certain names where it'd be an house name and a lot of different writers would...
Because I did so many books, he thought there was a team, it was a team doing it. Yeah. I mean, they were all... You knew them. You could ring up and speak to them. Nowadays, it's an email, and what I do find very, very bad is that it hasn't happened to me because I haven't got involved. But apparently, if you send a manuscript in, right, and this is specifically in the States, if you haven't heard within 8 weeks, you can take it as a reject. Well, I mean, good manners and courtesy cost nothing. Yeah. But I don't want to be treated like that.
No. So your Werewolf book was your first published novel.
Yeah.
Had you tried any novels prior to that and been rejected?
Let me think. Have I tried any novels? No. I've got a few ideas, and I probably would have tried them. But you see, in those days, apart from odd books, it was all commissioned.
All right.
I mean, with genre publishing, they knew what they wanted, right? I mean, they wanted so many horror books, so many westerns, everything. It was all commissioned. They didn't want anything outside those commissions. Mm-hmm. So you really had to get in and get the stuff commissioned.
Right. But you're obviously a book lover, as we saw earlier from your book collection. So, do you own an e-reader yourself? How do you think you'd feel reading on a screen?
I couldn't.
Right.
No, I won't. I don't like sitting. Well, I've got the writing machine I've got, which was customised for me, right? Because we're doing all these articles, which are under set subjects every week. I just go into them and it brings it up format and everything ready to start. It's not connected to email or anything. I don't want any distractions on that. It is, in effect, it's a computer that's been customised into a specific type of word processor, right? My assistant does all the computer work, which in this business has become so complicated that even if I had got a good grounding in it, I couldn't keep up with what they're doing. No, I like a book in my hand. Like one of my favourite times of the day is when I go to bed and I read for half, 3/4 of an hour with an actual book. I couldn't get used to an e. I can see why people have them, because they can take them wherever they want. I mean, read them on the train, on the bus, whatever. But myself, I do like the proper book, because I'm a great lover of vintage fiction.
Yeah.
I believe sometimes, and I mean, this hasn't affected my writing, but I've always read vintage stuff from early 20th century through to about 1950. You think to yourself, some of the books, which are very pedantic, and you think, God, if I'd been around in those times, I could have written better than that. No, I would have been exactly the same as they were.
Because they were of the time.
Yeah, same as I'm of the 70s and 80s writing, which fortunately hasn't changed a lot, I don't think.
No, it hasn't. The type of writing, or the type of books that you were bringing out in the 70s, if you look at all the successful horror movies of the 80s, they're all based in that sort of mindset. So I believe, like yourself, that I think horror's on the verge of making a big comeback. It's never really gone away, the same as the Western, but it just hasn't been as visible
because
as it...
the publishing industry have made it like that.
Yeah, I think they have for a long time dictated what or they say this is what people want to read, but it's not, because I wasn't aware of... So there wasn't any one moment when I became aware that these books were disappearing from the shops. It happened gradually. And then before you know, you think, the period during the 90s, Guy N. Smith isn't writing anymore, George Gilman isn't writing it, because you never saw these books.
That's right.
But the internet then, I think, has brought them back somewhat. So, as you say, you're not a big fan of all the technology.
No.
But
I mean, I realise it's the way to go.
yeah, has the internet made research any easier, do you think?
Yes, it has. But I mean, upstairs, I've got altogether, including what I've got in a chest up in the top, I've got about 600 scrapbooks. Now, what I used to do, anything really odd or fantastic, like somebody had caught a huge crab or one had been seen somewhere, I just used to cut it out and paste it in. I used to index everything. Of course, when you're, for instance, writing crabs, to find that there's a big monster been found somewhere, that's important to you. Same with prehistoric remains of monsters and things, you know. That is really basically my research.
And did those type of subjects sort of, you cut a news story out and you might use it years later because there's something in a news story that might appeal to you or you think you could write, would you have kept those cuttings prior to starting writing order?
No, I kept them after, once I'd started. But, I mean, I've got a real wad upstairs of synopses that have never made it, right? Because it was the old, I'm not talking about news library and this sort of horror stuff, but it's the old saying, if you sling enough mud at the wall, something will stick.
Right.
And, I mean, my assistant was going through them and she said, there's some cracking stuff here. I said, I know, but I said, the market was, by that time, was getting so choosy that unless you were known, and this is the problem I had, typecast as a horror author, right? They didn't think you could write anything else. But if you could, well, nobody would want to read it because your name is known to horror. And I have this, it was published as Dead End in the States, right? Now, I wrote this, it's quite a long book, right? And I sent it in to one of my publishers, Hodder and Stoughton, who owned News Library, and the editor rang me up and she said, this is an absolute superb book, but unfortunately we can't publish it because our salespeople have already seen it and they know it's you. She said, if you had sent it in under a pseudonym, we would have bought it. Because they knew it was me, and that's why they wouldn't buy it.
Yeah, and that's in some ways I think that perhaps all fiction should just be marketed as general fiction. A lot of people, you know, because you've got so-and-so's an horror writer, so-and-so's a thriller writer, right. You know, and you're not
I don't think you can write everything else.
No, it's like as if an actor only works in one type of film. Although it does happen with certain actors, but...
That's why I write all my children's books under Jonathan Guy. Because being a horror writer, publishers would say, no, parents wouldn't buy a children's book by him.
And yet at the end of the day it's all writing, and
yeah.
There's, as you said, if you sit down to write a children's book or an horror book, there's no real difference between what you're doing other than the subject matter.
That's right.
So you don't write any differently or think any differently. What are you writing? I know you write a lot of magazines articles and you're primarily a journalist.
Yeah.
But if just sticking to fiction, what are your writing practices at the moment?
Well, what I do at the moment, every morning, is absolutely Countryman's Weekly articles, right? In the after lunch, I'll go and see what's happening in the bookshop, give Kerry a hand, perhaps a few queries, whatever. As regard, it's incredible that nearly every day somebody finds me something to do in the evening. It comes in the emails. They want, could we have we'd like to do an interview with you in such and such. Could we send you some questions? So you got a batch of questions, right? You get all the fan mail, and I believe in answering everyone. And I'll sit down to look at those. Kerry will print a whole pile of stuff out for me, and I'll sit down in the evening to look at it when I've got time to put my mind to it. And that's when I do any fiction. I'll do it in the evenings, because it's got to be totally divorced from what I'm doing in the daytime.
Because I read somewhere that other than the journalism, you gave up writing practically for 10 years.
I didn't have a book published for 10 years, no, because publishing the way it had gone.
But were you actually still producing fiction during that period, or even though you weren't
writing it, but I wasn't selling it.
Right.
So now's the time to get it on ebooks, isn't it?
It is indeed, yeah. So you've got a programme of your ebooks come out in a couple of months, is it?
2 a month, yeah.
And these,
probably.
and at the moment, is it all backlist stuff that you've brought out?
What we're doing is, we're starting my writing career over again. We started with Werewolf by Moonlight, and he asked me for 2 books last week, which was The Neophyte and Throwback.
So when will we see the first original novel for ebook from Guy Smith?
I've asked the graphic designer to come up and see me within the next couple of weeks. I'll fix a time for him to come, and we'll look and discuss the cover, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a couple more ready after that. But I mean, I'm not just going to do them one after the other just like that. I mean, I'm going to do them on the lines we used to do when we were publishing books. There'll be one next year, perhaps one at the end of the year, one in the middle of the next year, every 6-8 months perhaps.
All right.
Otherwise, you're going back to saturation.
Yeah, and new readers then would presumably find you through the internet, through web, because
Yes.
you've got a website,
And
a Facebook page.
Twitter,
Right.
getting a good following on that, I'm told.
Yeah. It's a totally different world, isn't it, to what it was?
Well, no, just to say that, contrary to a rumour that was being circulated a few years back, I am still alive and writing. Some bookseller in Hay-on-Wye, I don't know which bookseller it was, somebody went in there trying to get one of my books. I asked if they got any books by me. He said, oh, he's dead. Oh, yeah. She said, I'm sure he isn't. He's got a fact. Oh, no, he said he's dead. Anyway, she came on to me, and we put a notice on the internet to the effect that Guy N. Smith is very much alive and still writing.